This story is based on reports sent in by our subscribers and edited by me. The names have been changed to protect anonymity. If you would like your story to be told here, feel free to contact us. We would be delighted to hear from you. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to like. So, let's get started. Far from here, but still, we did our best to make our marriage work. Between arguments and reconciliations, we built a routine. Sergio works as a night watchman at a gas station, a tough job, but it helps pay the bills. I always thought we led a simple but stable life, until everything changed. It happened a few weeks ago. I started to notice a fine dust accumulating in the corners of the living room and small holes appearing in the wooden furniture. At first, I thought it was my fault, just a lack of cleaning, but Sergio quickly identified the problem: termites. The infestation seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, and before we even realized it, it had gotten out of control. We tried everything: chemicals, home remedies. We even hired a handyman from the neighborhood to try something. Nothing worked. After a lot of insistence on my part, we finally agreed to call in a specialized team. The estimate was high, but we had no choice. They explained to us that to completely get rid of the termites, the entire house had to be fumigated, which meant we would have to leave for a whole week. And that's when the real problem arose. Where were we going to stay during that time? With our tight budget, renting a place was out of the question. I thought about asking a friend to let us stay, but Sergio was adamant. He suggested that we stay at his father's place. He lives alone, has plenty of space, and would surely welcome us with open arms, he said, not even giving me time to object. The idea made me uncomfortable. Sergio's father, Mr. Afonso, was a reserved man, not very talkative, but Sergio insisted, and in the end, I ended up agreeing. We had no other option. On the evening of our departure, we packed our bags in a hurry and drove to Mr. Afonso's house. It was an old single-story house located in a more remote neighborhood. When we parked, I felt a pang in my heart. Something about this place seemed to warn me that the coming week would not be easy. My stepfather greeted us at the door with a discreet smile, an almost formal gesture. He shook Sergio's hand, gave me a brief nod, and invited us inside. He showed us where we would be sleeping. A small guest room at the back of the house, with a narrow double bed and a window with heavy curtains that barely let the air circulate. "Make yourselves at home," he said before disappearing toward his own room. Sergio seemed comfortable, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of unease. This week away from home wasn't just going to be a temporary inconvenience. It would mark the beginning of something that would change my life forever. That evening, when Sergio left for work, I felt even more like a stranger in that house. He kissed me quickly before leaving, telling me to try to get some rest, that he would be back in the morning. I stayed alone in the guest room, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the yellowed walls and the ceiling fan lazily spinning above. The distant sound of a television, probably in Mr. Afonso's room, was the only thing breaking the silence of the house. I was still trying to get used to this environment, wondering if I should go out and explore the house a bit, when I heard 3 soft knocks at the door. Before I could even answer, Mr. Afonso's deep voice resonated from the other side. "Patricia, I made some soup. I thought you might want to have dinner." I hesitated for a moment. Although our relationship had always been cordial, the idea of dining alone with him made me uncomfortable. But I didn't want to seem impolite. I got up and opened the door. "Ah, of course. Thank you, Mr. Alfonso, I'm coming." I followed him to the kitchen, which was small and cozy, but filled with objects that seemed to be decades old. He was sitting, waiting for me, his hands folded on the table. "Have a seat," he said, pointing to the chair opposite him. "I hope it's to your liking," he added after a few minutes, breaking the silence. "It's excellent. Thank you for caring." He smiled, his eyes lingering on me a little longer than I thought was normal. It was as if he was trying to see beyond what I was showing. For a moment, I thought about starting a conversation, but I didn't know what to say. After we finished eating, he gathered the plates and began to wash them, refusing my help with a simple wave of his hand. "You seem uncomfortable here," he said without looking at me, while rinsing the dishes. "That's not it. I'm just trying to get used to it," I replied, feeling my cheeks flush. He paused for a moment, letting the water run, then turned to me with a slight smile, something I had never seen on his face before. "Don't worry, Patricia. You are welcome here. There's no need to be so tense." I nodded, trying to smile back at him, but there was something in the way he spoke that made me feel even more uneasy. When I returned to the bedroom, I lay down on the bed, but sleep was slow to come. The next morning, Sergio came back shortly after 8 o'clock. I was already up and making coffee in the kitchen when he walked in. He looked exhausted, with deep dark circles under his eyes and slumped shoulders. He gave me a kiss to say hello and headed straight for the table while I set a cup of coffee in front of him. Sergio ate quickly, more out of obligation than hunger, and in less than 20 minutes he was already lying on the mattress in the guest room, fast asleep. The routine that Sergio and I had built, mostly because of his job, had always been a challenge. Being a night watchman meant that we spent most of our time apart. Our intimacy, in particular, had suffered because of it. It was as if we were gradually drifting apart, even while living under the same roof. And here, away from our home, that distance seemed even greater. I felt lonely, lacking something. Honestly, it was hard to admit, even to myself, but it was starting to weigh on me. I decided to do a thorough cleaning of the house, not only to help my father-in-law, but also because I needed to keep my mind occupied. I changed clothes, put on a loose t-shirt and comfortable shorts, tied my hair up in a bun, and started looking for cleaning supplies. As I was cleaning, Mr. Alfonso appeared at the living room door. "You didn't have to do that, Patricia," he said, watching me with the same analytical look as the day before. "I know, but I thought it would be nice to tidy things up a bit. The house is too big for you to take care of it alone." He remained silent for a moment, as if weighing my words. Then he gave a slight smile. "You are very kind. Sergio is lucky," he said, before turning around and going out into the garden, where he began to water the plants that looked neglected. I didn't know yet that this tranquility was only a pause before something that would turn everything upside down. Night fell, accompanied by unbearable heat. After an entire day of cleaning, I was exhausted. That's when my father-in-law suggested that we order a pizza. The idea seemed excellent to me. While we waited for the delivery, he appeared at the living room door with a small can of beer in his hand. He opened it and took a sip. Then he handed me the other can he had taken from the refrigerator. "Do you want one?" "I know you're not used to it, but I think it goes well with this heat," he said, with an almost curious look. I hesitated for a moment. I've never been much of a drinker, but there was something about the atmosphere that night, the heat, the silence in the house, the feeling of being out of my comfort zone that made the idea more appealing. I ended up accepting. "All right, just one. I think it won't hurt," I said, trying to smile despite the strangeness of the situation being there, sharing a beer with Sergio's father. The first sip was bitter, but the chill of the ice-cold liquid seemed to instantly relieve the heat. While he drank his beer calmly, I kept sipping mine, trying to get used to the taste, which became more tolerable with each sip. But I noticed something unusual. He was sitting on the couch, and his crotch seemed to be bulging. I tried to look away. He seemed to notice that I had seen and crossed his legs to hide it. It unsettled me, but at the same time, a shiver ran down my neck. The pizza arrived, and Mr. Alfonso set the box on the table. We ate sitting on the couch, watching some random show on TV, without really paying attention to what was happening on the screen. The pizza, which should have been just a simple dinner, suddenly seemed to have another meaning. It was as if, in this uncomfortable situation, that exchange of words and the beer had created a kind of intimacy between us. Something I hadn't expected, but which, in some way, soothed my anxiety. With each of his laughs, I felt as if a part of me was waiting for something else. Maybe a bit of attention, a gesture that was a little closer, something that would fill the emptiness that Sergio's absence at night had carved out in me. Something was bubbling up inside. It was already late when I finally went up to the bedroom. Monsieur Alfonso had withdrawn to his quarters. I, on the other hand, was restless. I lay down on the bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I tried to push away the thoughts that were slowly starting to invade my mind. The closeness he had shown, the way he seemed more present that night, almost warm, was beginning to unsettle me in a way I didn't want to admit, not even to myself. He was Sergio's father, and that simple fact should have been enough to turn me away from these thoughts. But what had happened between us that evening seemed to have awakened something different, something deeper, more intimate. My body was on fire, as if the temperature in the house had suddenly risen. I knew it was irrational, that all of this was just a reflection of accumulation, of longing, of the lack of feeling someone inside me. And before I even realized it, I was salivating. I took a deep breath, trying to chase these thoughts away. I turned onto my side, trying to snuggle up against the bed, but the discomfort, mixed with a strange excitement, wouldn't go away. That's when I started touching myself, thinking about my stepfather, remembering the scene in the living room. The next morning, I woke up still haunted by the discomfort of the previous night, but I couldn't help but notice Mr. Alfonso's behavior. He was sitting at the table, a little farther away than usual, his eyes fixed on his coffee cup, completely avoiding looking at me. Whenever our eyes met, he would immediately look away, turning his gaze back to the newspaper or the window. He seemed lost in his own thoughts. But I knew he was trying not to look at me, and what piqued my curiosity even more was, it was the strange feeling that he knew something, perhaps more than I would have liked to admit myself. I needed some time alone, a bit of space to clear my thoughts. So I decided to go out and run some errands, an excuse to get away from that environment for a while and get some fresh air. I went outside without any particular purpose, just wandering through the corridors of the mall, trying not to think about anything. But at the same time, uncontrollable thoughts kept flooding my mind. When I got home in the late afternoon, Sergio was in the bathroom, taking a shower before leaving for work. I decided to improvise a little adventure. I took off my clothes and joined him in the shower. He opened his eyes wide in surprise. It had been several days since we had made love. I tried doing those little things to wake up the stick, but I quickly realized he wasn't in the mood. So, I left the bathroom, dried myself off, and sat on the bed while he finished his shower. An immense frustration washed over me. Our relationship seemed to be sinking a little more each day. I lay down on the bed and ended up falling asleep. When I woke up, it was already past 11 o'clock. I got up and went to the kitchen to drink some water. As I was taking a sip, I heard footsteps approaching in the house. I looked toward the kitchen door, and before I could even realize what was happening, the light suddenly switched on. It was my stepfather. I was caught off guard. I stood frozen for a moment, completely bewildered, because I was only wearing a thin tank top, barely enough to cover my ample chest. It was as if, at that very moment, I was exposed to him and there was nothing I could do about it. Mr. Alfonso looked at me, and although it was brief, he seemed to hesitate. His gaze did not turn away immediately, and for a moment, I felt the weight of those fleeting glances. I tried to take a step back, as if to hide myself, but I quickly realized that this gesture only heightened the tension. He then seemed to suddenly remember that he was staring at me too intensely, and quickly looked away, as if trying to hide that feeling, the very same feeling I was already experiencing. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," he said in a slightly lower voice. I simply took a deep breath, trying not to show how unsettled I was. "No, it's fine." And I managed to say it, trying to stay calm, even though inside, my heart was pounding wildly. As I passed by him in the doorway of the hallway, I felt the weight of his steady gaze, as if he wanted to devour me. With every step I took, my mind grew more confused. It felt as though he was following me with his eyes, tracking my every movement until I entered my room. As soon as I closed the door, I leaned against it, breathing deeply, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. My heart was racing, and I didn't know if it was because of the discomfort or the intensity of the moment I had just experienced. My stepfather's gaze seemed to be etched into me. There was something about that moment, about the silence between us, that made me feel vulnerable in a way I had never felt before. It was as if he had crossed an invisible barrier, as if, through that look, he knew more than he should have. Leaning against the door, I closed my eyes and tried to pull myself together. My thoughts were in disarray, a mix of guilt, confusion, and, to my great surprise, something more. My body was still tense, my muscles tight, and I could feel my skin burning. As if his gaze had left its mark. The tension that had been building since we arrived in this house seemed to reach its breaking point, and I didn't know if I would have the strength to face him. The next morning, something unexpected diverted the course of my thoughts. It was already Friday, and I was counting the days until we could return to our house, driven more by an urgent need to escape this situation before giving in to a temptation I knew was dangerous. I clung to the idea that soon everything would go back to normal, or at least to what I believed was normality. Sergio had just come home from work and was in the bathroom, getting ready to relax. I was sitting on the bed when I remembered that I needed to look up some information about a piece of furniture we wanted to buy for the house. My phone was completely dead, so without thinking too much about it, I grabbed Sergio's. It wasn't something I usually did. We had a tacit agreement to respect each other's privacy, but at that moment, it just seemed like a purely practical gesture. When I unlocked the device, a notification popped up at that very moment. It was a message. My finger, maybe by reflex or by force of fate, touched the screen and opened the conversation. My heart started racing instantly, as if my body understood long before my mind what I was about to discover. The message was intimate, far more than it should have been. It said, "I miss you. I can't wait for our next meetings." My world froze at that very moment. I was still trying to process those words when my heart turned completely cold. The sender's profile picture, it was a man's. I stayed frozen, my eyes glued to the screen, unable to react. My mind refused to connect the pieces of what I had just seen. A flood of questions overwhelmed me as my hands trembled while holding the device. I looked toward the bathroom door, still closed, with the sound of the shower echoing in the room. Inside was the man I had shared my life with for 4 years, but who, at that moment, seemed like a complete stranger to me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether I should confront him right away or wait until I had time to process what I had just discovered. All I knew was that in a matter of seconds, the idea of normalcy I had been clinging to had completely collapsed. I put Sergio's phone back exactly where I had found it, and with superhuman effort, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. But when he came out of the bathroom, everything inside me was burning. My heart was a mix of disgust and anger. I wanted to scream, to confront him right then and there, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. And yet, his mere presence in the room was enough to make me shiver with irritation. Without saying a word, I left the room. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. I knew it was the end. No matter the doubts or questions in my mind, one thing was clear. I couldn't go on with him anymore. The reasons or the circumstances no longer mattered. I knew that from that moment on, our marriage had no future. I spent the rest of the day in silence, trying to put my thoughts in order. But as the hours passed, as day gave way to night, something inside me began to change. When Sergio left for work, the decision I had been putting off took on a new form. I was no longer going to deprive myself. I was no longer going to suppress what I felt. It wasn't just a matter of desire. It was a matter of honor, of freedom. If he had crossed the line, then I was ready to cross mine too. I stood up, determined, my heart racing and a feeling of power surging through me. I knew exactly what I wanted to do that night. I had decided there was no more room for doubt. I took a long, slow shower. I left Larissa completely smooth. When I got out of the bathroom, I applied moisturizer all over my body. My reflection in the mirror showed me a woman determined to live out her desires, without guilt or regret. I chose a tight-fitting dress, something that hugged my curves provocatively. As I left the bedroom, I tried to act naturally. I walked into the living room where Mr. Alfonso was sitting, watching television. But as soon as he saw me, his posture changed immediately. He had trouble looking away. His eyes betrayed a mix of surprise and tension. He straightened up on the couch, clearly uncomfortable, trying to hide his reaction, but the redness on his cheeks gave him away. I took advantage of this moment of vulnerability to approach him with a more direct gaze, full of intent that I knew he would understand. I asked in a casual tone, "Would you like to join me for a beer?" For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, as if he was trying to process my words. But before he could refuse or ask a question, I went to the refrigerator and grabbed 2 cans. I walked back to the living room slowly, feeling the weight of his gaze on me every second. When I sat down next to him on the couch, the distance between us was minimal, just enough for him to feel my presence and understand that I wasn't there by chance. I handed him one of the cans and opened mine, taking a sip while looking him straight in the eye. My eyes were locked with his, and that charged silence seemed to say much more than any words could. Sitting there next to him, I knew that this night was only just beginning. I went to get 2 more cans, and as I came back to the living room, I noticed that he was clearly pressing his crotch, already quite aroused. I seized the opportunity, and as I arrived with the cans, I deliberately leaned forward while handing him his. The closeness was intentional, but still felt natural. My movement accentuated the neckline of my dress. Underneath, I wasn't wearing anything, and he could see that my headlights were definitely on. I placed my hand on his thigh, pressing it gently, as if searching for a deeper point of connection. His eyes sought mine, as if to confirm that this gesture was welcome. While my fingers traced a subtle, almost hesitant movement, yet full of intent, my body reacted before my mind, as if it already knew what was about to happen. When our lips finally met, it was gentle at first, a timid, cautious exchange. But soon, the kiss intensified, as if all the tension that had built up between us was finally finding an outlet. My hand, now, was exploring new paths, and at the touch, I could feel the desire growing between us, quickening, carried by this chemistry we could no longer hide. His lips were firm, yet at the same time so soft that they made me want even more. He pulled me closer, making me feel the warmth of his body with every touch, and in the same movement, his tongue slid over my lips, asking for permission to go further. I responded without hesitation, allowing our mouths to join in a dance that grew more and more intense, more and more urgent. We stayed there, on the couch, and when he settled me on top of him, I didn't just feel desire entering me, I felt care, attention. My senses were blurring. His scent, the taste of his skin, the way our breaths mingled, everything became a fusion of sensations that made me lose control. At times, our movements were quick, full of intent, and I allowed myself everything, in every corner. During those hours, I completely lost myself. The outside world had vanished, and all that existed was this moment between us. It was so intense that I couldn't think of anything else. The chaos of my life, which I knew I would soon have to face, seemed so distant, as if it were something I could put off until later, in another life. I knew I had to sort out my situation with Sergio, but at that very moment, I didn't feel a shred of guilt. It was as if, in that moment of intensity, all I needed was to be there, completely surrendered to the pleasure and connection we shared. I felt fulfilled, as if I was finally experiencing something that made me feel alive, something that made me forget the doubts and responsibilities waiting for me outside this space. And you, what did you think of this story? Leave your comments below and share your opinions or experiences. I can't wait to read them all. See you very soon.